So for the past 2 months now, I've been writing some essays. They're both on the same topic, and the hope was to like have these essays like scripts and use them to like have more structured like vlogs. Even if it was like a one-time deal, I wanted to have like some sort of script to read off of, and you know edit a video around and have a less rambly video. And clearly that's fallen through, because quite honestly, I don't agree with the essays, and because I don't agree with those essays, I find myself in a peculiar situation where it's weirdly meta, where it's now I want to discuss these essays I wrote, and so I want to counter argue myself in a way. And so I don't know the best way to do that without publishing those those essays. So I think the better thing to do is to describe them and counter them, I suppose. But the best way to do that is to do it more off the cuff. So essentially, as a recap, I've been getting back into Dungeons and Dragons. I've been having a great time playing D&D. And early on in my campaign, one of the things I picked up on and I keyed in on is that like I need to like prepare my games a lot better. And so like overnight my game prep went from being exceptionally poor to like being hilariously more structured, really rigorously structured. And like the key structure to my notes is I structure my games by scenes. So I use a program called like Joplin, which is something like Microsoft's not Evernote, but rather Microsoft OneNote, and a program called Evernote, and some other programs like this. And the way I structure my notes is like I'll have like an adventure and then subfolders, like, or whatever, subdirectories for things like characters that are going to be in this adventure, the scenes that are going to be in this adventure, the various monsters that might be in this adventure and their stat blocks, maybe even things like rules I might commonly have to be using during this adventure. That's something else I could do. But the most key thing I have is a scene by scene by scene by scene structure, because I'm I like to consider myself more narrative focused more than anything. And so I like to, at the very least, know the plot beats as we go along. Even if things kind of go off the rails, I at the very least like to have a plan so I know what to do if things do go off the rails in whatever way possible, and what to do to shift things back on, on course. And we can get into a discussion of rails and all this other stuff, or the sandbox, or what have you, but that's not this video. I think it's personally virtuous for any DM to at the very least have a plan before they get into their games. But I'm not going to bemoan someone if like the most of their prep it fits on a post-it card like this. If your prep fits on something like a 3x5 card like this, more power to you. In fact, I'd love to have them. In fact, I'm fairly certain that given enough time, my prep probably would best fit on something like this. Especially since the core of my prep is on a scene by scene basis, more than anything. Especially if I this and this, but we don't want to go. I don't want to get into too much details here. My old prep, though, it focused on the wrong things, and it's for a lot of reasons. But looking at like a lot of my prep, sometimes it's obvious why. We actually do have to start off with why my prep probably looked like the way it was. And this is because back in the day, for some reason, and I think it's because of my old group, I believed I had to be like this this super improvising master, where I could sit here and I could string together like stories and plots for my players using nothing more than like an idea of like, you know, character names, city locations, and all this other stuff. And you know, I always found myself very nervous running games because I just didn't have ideas or plans for my sessions, quite honestly. You know, this keys back into like probably why I thought prep was so important. But you know, I think it just was the group I was running with. There was something about the group I was running with that, you know, that made me very nervous. You know, I think my group was having fun just playing D&D. I could feel that they wanted a certain something else from the games, and they wanted this sort of like highly reactive world that was highly reactive to what the players did. And at that point in time, I didn't have the muscles for this. I didn't have the experience to like sit here and like have a highly reactive world like that. These days, like, if my players do things that I don't really like fully expect, I'm a lot more comfortable, you know, going off the rails and ad-libbing a bit. But, you know, back in the day, that kind of stuff kind of shocked me, you know. But it really didn't help that I just didn't have any prep or planning in the first place to really guide me like that. But again, the reason I didn't do a whole lot of really good prep or planning like I do now is just because of this misguided thought that all I needed was just to know character names and all this other stuff, and I could cobble together, you know, a good session. And my notes kind of reflect this, you know. There's a lot of notes where, you know, there's a lot of world building going on, but not a lot of description of like what's going to happen during the adventure, what are the plot beats or anything like that. It'll just say something like a vague description that like just a synopsis, like there's a village being controlled by its lord. The lord is like some demon worshipping whatever, and that's about it. That's all I say on the matter. And you know, I do remember that particular game actually, and it went roughly okay. I just wish I had run it a little better in hindsight. But you know, my notes were just generally poor. I remember one set of notes that like read like a journal entry, and I thought they were post-game session notes, but they're pre-game session notes, but written like a journal entry. And I'm just kind of looking at this, and I'm like, what the hell was I doing? And then the session notes after that are just a bunch of world building nonsense alongside me like fretting over like the decisions made by my players and like listing out like possible options as to what I should do during the session to account for what the players did in the previous session, as if like, you know, I have like a multiple choice to work off of and I have to decide on game night what to do. And it's like these days the answer is no. Decide at some point, make a concrete conclusion. What's going to happen on next week's session? What's going to happen? Because what my players had done was that they'd killed the mayor, and I'm just kind of like befuddled by this. And I'm befuddled in like a lot of ways. I was not happy with that the more I thought about it, because in a truly reactive world, in my mind's eye, the village would know that the players blew up the mayor. One of my players was like, how would they know? And I'm like, and even to this day, I'm like, because the group of people that includes a drow spec ops man, a tiefling gunslinger, I think a minotaur of some kind, and an Asmar, which would, for all intents and purposes, look like a human being, just waltzed into town, took care of like a goblin problem or whatever, at a nearby fortress, and clearly are capable of blowing stuff up. So, you know, I think the group of adventurers are responsible. And there's a lot of things I could have done. Like in hindsight, I could have just had my issue was I didn't want like my players to be villains, but like the simplest thing would have just been to have my players like be no longer welcome in this village. It's like, if we see you back here again, we will hang you type deal. And that probably would have sufficed them. It's it's a consequence of their actions, and it's a negative consequence, but it's something they live with, and it happened. They still got away with blowing up the mayor. That's something. And we just continue the adventures on with a fairly morally ambiguous group now for an adventure. God, I really wish I could possess myself 10 years ago just to run that adventure proper now. That would have been an interesting adventure now that I think about it. Oh, Christ. But that's the thing, though. The conclusion being reached by these essays, implicit as it is a problem of that. If my prep were a lot better, and even as I'm saying it in some way on accident, you might be led to believe that I'm concluding that the prep is the problem. It's not that the prep is the problem. It's that my experience with was the problem. Back in those days, I didn't really have like a lot of experience running D&D, and my group at the time didn't really fully help either. They had certain expectations of how they wanted the game ran, and they were kind of spoiled by one of our DMs as is, because they were an exceptionally experienced DM themselves. But me at that time, I was both exceptionally inexperienced as a DM and also as a person. I was like 19 years old, and so the major difference between me then and me now is 10 years of just overall growth and development, both as a human being and as a person who constantly likes to read about D&D stuff and listen to DMs describe their games and things that they think could have been better about their games, and so on and so forth. And I'm really big on that whole self-reflection stuff, trying to make your craft a lot better. And so the conclusion reached by these essays is just completely wrong. I don't think that if I was using something like Evernote or Microsoft OneNote back in those days, or if Joplin existed, I don't think any of those tools would have helped me. I don't think any of those tools would help me. Something like Dungeon Draft would have helped me, though. Oh man, I could go into detail about like the weirdest misconceptions I had about like playing the game. Just Jesus Christ, man. But in any case, 10 years ago, I just didn't really have like a lot of experience in the hobby, and it's only really now that I'm doing like a lot more serious thinking about like how I want to run my games and all this other stuff. Games like Shadowrun and Vampire were still like bothering me, and it's only until recently I finally kind of realized what it is that's always intrigued me, at least with Vampire, and also I guess Shadowrun, in their sort of urban fantasy settings that I want to like capture. And I realize that I don't have to be beholden, as much as I love the meta plot and universe of the Vampire the Masquerade, I don't have to be super beholden to like a politics heavy world. But that's neither here nor there in terms of discussion. So these essays just are completely wrong. Their conclusions, there's implicit conclusions of me having better prep helping are wrong. At least I'm fairly certain of it. I don't know if like better prep would have like actually helped me. I'm more certain though that maybe a much more understanding group that I guess was just highly supportive and told me, yeah, we're having fun, I wish we could do this or that, but I'm having a good time. I understand that you're kind of trying to find your footing and all this other stuff. But I'm having a good time here, that probably would have helped me a lot more back in 2012 to 2014, quite honestly. And I don't know if I ever heard that from my group back in the day. I might have heard it once or so, and once would have been enough. But like, if they ever said it, it never reached me, I'm afraid. And so like, I started just becoming like really gun shy though. I would like miss out on sessions. I would delay sessions just because like I felt really, really like nervous about running the game for all sorts of reasons. But in hindsight, it's such a mess. It is a complete mess. But let's get off that. So what would have helped me really back in the day? And I don't really know what would have helped me. A supportive group on one hand would have absolutely been like the greatest help, period. Just period. But I think maybe just running a bunch of one-shots with like various people, even if it's just me running Hollow's Last Hope, Hollow's Last Hope, a Paizo module that I really like, over and over again with like various people, would have been just great. In my mind, even if it's just running the same module over and over and over again, the same person running that module could never run that same adventure the same way, twice. I personally don't think, for a variety of reasons. One, different players will do different things, will approach these adventures in different ways, so on and so forth. And just two, Hollow's Last Hope has things in it that, like, if I ran it multiple times, there are certain things I would want to experiment with. Like, most times I've ran that module, I have never taken into account like players needing to rest up and and having to take time to like explore the wilderness outside of Falcon's Hollow in an attempt to like get the ingredients for the disease for the disease that's plaguing the town. And so one of the things I never do is I never do the whole like dice roll to see if like people in the town of Falcon's Hollow die. I never do that. And because I never do that, on some level, a certain tension is I feel is kind of lost to the game. There's never like the possibility, I feel. The possibility never exists that like the players could take too much time and come back and everyone in the village is dead. And it's always something I really wanted to like experiment with and just flat out tell my players, listen, it is up to you people to like properly be sure that you get from point A to point B to point C, D, and then back to the village in a timely manner. Because as you dawdle about, people are dying. And if I were to do that, though, it would take some prep, but it's something I've always glossed over, and I don't like glossing over it. But, I've ran this module like 4 times, and the most recent time I've completely bent it out of shape to fit my own needs, And so, I think running the same module over and over again for a bunch of different people, fulfills that. You now know this module like the inside out. You could probably reskin it so that it no longer takes place in Falcon's Hollow, but a different place. But the plot beats are all the same. In fact, I would love to do that and just reskin the whole module under different pretenses. But past me was very timid about the whole concept of playing with random people, though. Even just, entering a random group, that seemed taboo to myself back in the day. So it would have helped. It certainly would have helped, it certainly would have helped if me and back in the day, just actually threw himself out there and actually like played in random groups and decided to run for random groups, but I didn't. And even now, I'd be uncertain if like my current group just like, fell apart for any reason. Would I be able to like, put a new group together? It's not, or rather, would I have, the gall to like sit there and be like, listen, I'm looking for a group of people and I want to run games on this day that I'm completely free on. I gotta be honest, I don't know if I fully have it in me to do that, but I did have it in me to like allow for, the call to be put out that I wanted players for, Wednesday games. And, now I've got a group now, with at least, 2 people, nobody previously really, knew. 2 people come from like just random discords. One person's, I think, a friend of a friend, and so on and so forth. So, it's difficult, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say what would have helped past me. Do I think prep and planning would have like fixed everything back in the day? No. But is it important? Yeah, it's an important fixture of like my week to week D&D games. I spend a lot of time in like Joplin, just like structuring out like things like NPC dialogue, scenes that I want to like lead my players through. And actually, let me bring up my Joplin notes real quick. Actually. So like, yeah, so now, my notes are a lot more prepped now. My notes now, have at least some form of structure. And the previous game I had ran using these notes aren't, the best laid plans here, but there's something, and there's something to work off of, and they worked, and they helped to guide me through this particular game. I say these weren't the best laid plans, and they're decently well laid plans. The problem is that like the moment any combat encounter I had, major combat encounter that had humans involved, played out, they didn't play out as combat encounters, and I won't go into detail about that. But like, even if past me were running, an adventure with like some actual planning and prep and all this other stuff in it, if my players sat there and they just wanted to like talk things out with the enemy, I'd probably have gone like really gobsmacked by that. And me now, I get fucking floored when my players do that, but I do my best to facilitate that. I look over what my players are doing, and I try to react to that. I've had my players sit there and disguise themselves as like some other groups of people that like I thought within reason some guards at some mausoleum would sit here and be like, okay, what are you guys here for? My players were under the assumption though that like the guards were also like of the same faction they were disguised as, but that's neither here nor there. But like, it was realistically played out in my mind, and once the plot reveal came to my players, or at least the reveal came to my players, a realization of, oh Christ, these are a different set of people from a different set of groups or whatever. It's like, oh, that's why we were having so much trouble getting into this fucking mausoleum, But yeah. So in conclusion, the last 10 years, just a lot has gone on in my life, and it's all culminated in terms of at least D&D and me, having a much better sense of how I want to run my games. And, even if it's like a recent addition, the way I prepare my games, I feel is exceptionally important to me. and the way I prep and structure my games is exceptionally important to me. It was important enough for me to think that like it was the most mind-blowingly important thing to like write an essay about. But again, the problem I had with those essays is the implicit conclusions I was reaching, and I don't think the implicit conclusions, once I shatter them, it does make the idea that prep is that important seem a little weird to me. But it is important to me, and it's this subjective thing to each person that really killed it for me. The more I realize that like there are probably some people out there, and I know some people who would argue that they are able to run their games with as little prep as possible, and they get more power to them. But the way I run my games, there is a structure. Even if I was using something like Forgotten Realms as like my setting, there is a structure to my settings to my games that I want to like uphold. So that way, we have our rising action, our climax, and then our, descending action or whatever, and then rising action again because it's not over yet, Snake. But yeah. That's it for this video, and I was hoping this thing would be wrapped up in under like 20 minutes, but 30 minutes, it's decent enough.